If anyone ever asked me what hell looks like, I wouldn't describe cauldrons of boiling oil or seas of fire. I would simply show them the smile of my sister-in-law, Victoria, as she stood on the marble balcony, looking down at my 3 children playing on the lawn, and said in the most irritating voice imaginable, "Oh God, Ellen, are you letting these wild rabbits run around again? Look at them. The quantity is certainly high, but the quality of education is, well, quite concerning. Rabbits. That is how my husband's family, the prestigious Douglas clan, refers to my children, not grandchildren, not little angels, but creatures reproducing recklessly and incompetently." I stood there, my hand gripping the grease-stained kitchen towel, looking up at the woman wearing a silk dress worth my entire year's income. I remembered 7 years ago, in New York, when I, a poor but proud painter, fell in love with Mark Douglas. He painted for me a fairy tale story in upstate New York, about a vast estate where love for art would be nurtured. I believed it. And the price I paid for that naivety was being locked inside this cold golden cage. The Douglas estate was divided into 2 distinct worlds. On the other side of the garden was the main castle, an imposing stone fortress where the eldest couple, Alexander and Victoria, reigned. They had no children, but they had power. Mr. and Mrs. Douglas were old and frail, and had handed over all management of the company and assets to the brilliant, sharp eldest son and his wife. And us? My husband and I lived in the little house, hidden behind the oak grove. "Ellen, can you please tell the kids to keep their voices down?" Mark's voice came from the living room, cutting off my thoughts. My husband was curled up on the sofa, holding a glass of wine, his eyes fixed on the window facing the main castle with his usual look of fear. "They're just playing, Mark. They're at an age where they need to develop. Why do you keep asking them to stay quiet all the time?" I replied, trying to hold back a sigh. Mark jumped up, his handsome but weak face twisted in anxiety. "But Alexander is working. You know how he is. If the noise makes him lose focus, he'll cut our monthly allowance again. Last month's money was already 3 days late, Ellen. Do you only feel satisfied when I have no spending money left?" I looked at my husband, the 35-year-old man who still lived off his brother's allowance. He wasn't a partner, he was just an overgrown child with the Douglas surname, a docile parasite clinging to the host that was this estate. Mark's cowardice no longer broke my heart, it just made me sick. "You're that afraid of your brother, Mark? You're an artist, you have hands, why don't you earn your own money?" Mark scoffed, the bitter smile of someone who has long lived on their knees. "An artist? Who would buy my paintings in this godforsaken place? And stop romanticizing life. Just keep your kids quiet." My kids. When things were fine, he called them our children. When he feared losing money, they became my burden alone. That afternoon, Victoria visited my garden again. She never set foot inside the house, as if afraid that our poverty and messiness would cling to her designer clothes. She stood by the fence, watching my 3 children covered in dirt. "The kids are very energetic," Victoria said, her lips curling into a refined, contemptuous smile. "But perhaps they need a more disciplined boarding school rather than running around like this. Quantity never makes up for quality in education, Ellen. You have so many children, are you sure you can raise them to become decent people? Or will you just create more burdens for society?" Every word she said was a poison-tipped needle. To her, my having children was proof of my lack of control, lack of sophistication, and lower-class primitiveness. "They're happy, Victoria," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "And they are loved. That is the best quality of education." Victoria burst out laughing, the shrill sound like shattering glass. "Loved? Can love pay Philip's Exeter tuition? Can love buy company shares? Oh, naive Ellen, you always romanticize poverty." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing frozen in the yard, my chest tight with humiliation. But I didn't know that her contempt was only the prelude to the real tragedy. The disaster struck on Christmas Eve. The long dining table in the main castle was lavishly set with silver candles and crystal. Mr. and Mrs. Douglas sat at the head of the table. Alexander and Victoria sat across from each other, radiating authority. My husband, my children, and I sat timidly at the far end, like uninvited guests. Mark kept kicking my leg under the table, signaling me to remind the kids not to make noise while eating soup. The atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Alexander was going on and on about Q4 profits and million-dollar mergers. No one cared whether Mark had sold any paintings, or whether the kids had gotten an A in math. We were faint shadows in the brilliant portrait of the Douglas dynasty. I took a deep breath and put down my spoon. I knew this news wouldn't be welcomed, but I couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Mother, father, brother, sister-in-law. I began, my voice trembling slightly but trying to stay steady. I have an announcement to make. All eyes turned to me. Mark stared at me, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, as if sensing doom. I'm pregnant with the fourth child. The clattering of cutlery against porcelain suddenly stopped. Silence engulfed the vast dining room, heavier and more terrifying than any shout. There were no claps. No congratulatory smiles. No joyful tears. The Christmas dinner instantly turned into a funeral. Mrs. Douglas slowly set down her wine glass. She looked at me, her cold eyes scanning my stomach as though seeing a malignant tumor, a new liability on the family balance sheet. The fourth? She asked, her voice devoid of any warmth of motherhood. Ellen, do you think this estate is a charity home? Mark lowered his face into his soup bowl, not daring to lift his head to defend his wife even once. Victoria took a sip of wine, her sharp eyes gliding over me, then stopping on my belly with a strange calculating look that I could not yet understand. Another rabbit, Victoria said, her voice light but echoing through the room. Mark, how do you plan to feed it? With air? Or are you planning to hold out your hand and ask Alexander for a bigger allowance again? Mark stammered, his face burning with shame. I don't know, Ellen, why didn't you talk to me first? How did you let this happen? My husband's words were the final knife stabbing into my heart. He didn't protect me, he blamed me in front of those tearing me apart. Alexander wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at me with the weary expression of a boss looking at an employee who has just caused trouble. Fine, what's done is done. But let me be clear, next year's family budget for the subsidiary branch is not increasing. You'll have to figure out how to handle that fourth mouth yourselves. I sat there, my hands instinctively going to my belly. Around me were cold stone walls, cold-blooded people, and a cowardly husband. I looked down at my stomach, where a tiny life was forming, and felt a vague sense of fear. Not of poverty, but of Victoria's gaze. She was no longer looking at me with disdain. She was staring straight at my stomach, her eyes blazing with a crazed hunger carefully hidden beneath her elegant exterior. That was not the look one gives a soon-to-be-born niece or nephew. It was the look of a hunter who has just spotted the fattest prey. The dinner ended in deadly silence. I had no idea that, in that very moment, the fate of the child in my womb had already been placed on the bargaining table for valuation. And I, the mother rabbit in this gilded cage, was about to face the most brutal deal of my life. 2 weeks after that fateful Christmas Eve, the cold of upstate New York seemed to seep all the way into the bone. The air in the estate was filled with a suffocating silence, the kind of silence of a storm gathering strength before sweeping everything away. Mark avoided me, burying himself in bottles of alcohol in the art room, leaving me alone to face the growing pregnancy and the overdue bills. And then, the invitation, or rather, the summons was sent. Victoria wanted me to take a walk with her in the rose garden. The Douglas family's winter rose garden was a desolate sight but still exuded a proud elegance. The spindly thorny stems rose above the white snow, cold and sharp like their owner herself. I wrapped my old, worn-out sweater tighter around me, trying to keep my belly warm, walking beside Victoria. She looked like an ice queen in her cream cashmere coat worth thousands of dollars, her neck wrapped in a Hermes scarf, perfect down to every strand of hair. We walked for a while, the crunch of snow under our feet the only sound. Victoria stopped in front of a withered rosebush, not turning her head as her voice rose lightly but full of calculation. "Ellen, you know, I've thought a lot about your announcement at the Christmas party. About your and Mark's situation. About the lack that the child you're about to have will have to suffer." I gripped the hem of my sweater tighter, wary. "Thank you for your concern, Victoria. But we will manage. Mark and I will find a way." Victoria turned around, that expertly crafted pitying smile on her lips making me shiver. "Manage? How? With Mark's paintings that no one buys? Or with the allowance Alexander is considering cutting?" She stepped closer to me, the scent of expensive perfume rushing into my nose, overpowering even the cold air. Her eyes ran over my old sweater, stopping at the slight curve of my belly. "I have a proposal for you, Ellen. A perfect solution for all of us. We call it intra-family adoption." I frowned, not understanding what she meant. "What do you mean?" Victoria took a check from her crocodile leather purse, holding it loosely between two perfectly manicured fingers, then extended it toward me. I looked at the numbers. $750,000. My heart skipped a beat, not out of greed, but because of the enormous insult behind that number. "Ellen, be rational." Victoria's voice became persuasive, like someone closing a real estate deal. "You're an artist, you understand the value of $750,000. That's an amazing price for an unexpected incident. Just think of it as being a surrogate. This child will have a royal future with me, instead of growing up in hardship with you. This is a deal where you win big." I looked at the check, then at her beautiful but soulless face. The blood in my body boiled, hot enough to burn away the winter cold. "You're calling my child an unexpected incident?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "And you want to buy it like buying a piece of furniture for your empty castle?" Victoria sighed, her face like she was explaining simple math to a slow child. "Don't dramatize it. This is the final act of compassion we're offering you. You'll have money to raise the other three your rabbits, remember? And this baby will become the legal heir of Alexander and me. It will bear the Douglas name, attend Phillips Exeter, live a royal life. Don't you want the best for your child?" I looked deep into her eyes. Before, that authoritative gaze would have made me bow in fear. I used to feel small, inferior in the face of her wealth and quality she always preached. But today, right here in this dead garden, Victoria's flawless shell suddenly cracked before my eyes. I did not see a powerful noblewoman. I saw only a desperate woman, a withered tree trying to use money to buy something God had refused to give her. Her arrogance was just a curtain hiding a terrifying fear, the fear of extinction. A strange feeling rose in me. Not fear anymore, but absolute contempt. I laughed. A small, dry laugh, but enough to make Victoria's face stiffen. She frowned, annoyed at my reaction not going according to her script. "What are you laughing at?" she growled. I lifted my head, looking straight into the wavering eyes of my sister-in-law. "Compassion?" I repeated, releasing each word slowly. "Or the desperation of a species standing on the brink of extinction." Victoria's face flushed red, the thick makeup unable to hide the anger erupting within her. "What did you say? How dare you?" she hissed. "I'm not done," I cut her off, my voice hardening, sharp like the rose thorns beside us. "You called my children rabbits, wild and uneducated? You always talk about quality over quantity." I stepped forward, forcing Victoria to instinctively take a step back. For the first time in 7 years, I was the one in control. "But look at reality, Victoria. This prestigious Douglas bloodline can only continue thanks to the womb of this rabbit. You people have mansions, money, power. but you lack the most basic element of life. And now, you have to lower yourself to beg, oh sorry, to pay for the jeans you always look down on. Victoria gritted her teeth, her hand squeezing the check until it wrinkled. Don't delude yourself, Ellen. Without our money, you would starve with that belly. Who do you think you are? You're nothing but a breeding machine. At least this machine still works, I replied coldly, glancing at her flat stomach. And you? You're just a property manager for my children. Then I turned and walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the gray rose garden. I heard her scream behind me, the scream of someone defeated, stripped of her noble mask. You'll regret this, Ellen. You'll crawl back here begging me to take it. You and your useless husband won't survive this winter. I didn't look back. The cold wind lashed my face, but inside me burned a new fire. I knew the war had only begun. I had just refused $750,000 and declared war on the people who controlled the fate of all upstate New York. But when I placed my hand on my belly, I knew I had won the first battle. I was no longer a rabbit in a cage. I was a mother protecting her child from a pack of old, desperate wolves. And the first wolf I needed to handle was none other than the man sharing my bed. I walked back into the house, carrying the icy cold from the rose garden and the disgust still stuck in my throat. The wooden door of the little house closed behind me, separating me from Victoria's world, but trapping me in another nightmare, stifling and pathetic. Mark was standing there, right in the middle of the cramped living room, holding a crystal glass filled with a swirling amber liquid. The smell of expensive whiskey, the 18-year single malt he bought with Alexander's allowance, rushed straight into my nose, overpowering even the familiar child scent of the house. When he saw me, Mark staggered toward me. He set his glass of wine down on the table, then grabbed my shoulders. His hands were burning hot and damp, the grip of a drowning man clinging to a log, not of a husband welcoming his wife home. His alcohol-laden breath washed over my face as he leaned down, his voice slurred, a mixture of pleading and justification. Ellen, don't be mad at me. I know what Victoria said to you. And I think we should consider it. I did it for our future. I stood still, letting him talk, feeling the cowardly trembling pass from his hand into my shoulder. You see, Mark continued, his dull eyes trying to search for agreement in mine. The baby will still be here, still living on this estate, still calling us aunt and uncle. They'll give it a luxurious life, the best schools, the nicest clothes. And what do we have? A cramped little house, overdue bills, and 3 children growing like weeds. Stop dreaming, Ellen, and be a good mother by making a sacrifice for your child. A good mother. I repeated the phrase in my head. In Mark's dictionary, being a good mother meant selling your child in exchange for financial stability for the father. I raised my hand and peeled each of his fingers off my shoulder. I did it slowly, meticulously, as if removing a leech, a parasite clinging tightly to my skin. I stepped back, creating enough distance to clearly see the man I had married 7 years ago. Before, I saw him through the lens of love, a romantic painter untrusted by his family. But now, when the curtain of illusion had been torn apart by the offer of $750,000, I saw only the bare truth. There was no romance at all. Only a 35-year-old man in a wrinkled shirt, living off his brother's pity, and now wanting to sell his own blood to maintain that parasitic lifestyle. Mark, look in the mirror, I said, my voice calm to the point of being cold. What are you saying? Mark asked blankly, his hand still hanging in midair. You're not a father, nor a husband. My voice was as sharp as a razor blade. Look at yourself. You're drinking $200 a bottle wine while your child is wearing shoes that were already too tight last year. Mark frowned, the wounded pride of an incompetent man rising to the surface. So what if I drink a little? I'm under pressure. You think living under Alexander's shadow is easy? I stepped closer to him, looked straight into his wide eyes, and whispered the cruelest words I had held in my heart for years. Pressure? The only pressure you have is figuring out how to bow even lower in front of your brother. And do you know what the truth is? Your role in this house is nothing but a sperm donor, Mark. And worse, you're just a bearded child living on your brother's allowance, and now, when that money is threatened, you want to sell your own child to buy safety for yourself. Mark froze. His face shifted from pale to bright red with humiliation and rage. He slammed his hand on the table, spilling wine everywhere. You dare look down on me? Mark growled, but the growl sounded more like the whimper of a wounded animal than authority. Who do you think you are? Without the Douglas money, without this roof over your head, you'd be a poor, freezing painter dying on the street. You're freeloading off my family and still dare lecture me. Freeloading? I let out a cold, contemptuous laugh. The play of the obedient wife was over. I turned and walked to the old oak cabinet in the corner, the only place in the house with a private lock Mark never noticed because he was too busy caring about the liquor cabinet. I opened the secret drawer and took out a thick brown envelope. I turned back and tossed the envelope onto the table, right next to the spreading puddle of wine. The sound of paper hitting the table was crisp and dry. Open it, I ordered. Mark looked at me suspiciously, his hands trembling as he picked up the envelope. He pulled out the stack of papers inside. The first sheet was a bank statement under my name. The second was an exclusive contract with a famous gallery in New York, signed under the pseudonym E.V. Mark's eyes widened to their limits as he saw the numbers. Thousands of dollars transferred steadily every month from the sale of my paintings. The total balance in my account was 3 times the amount he had begged his brother for over the past year combined. What is this? Mark stammered, holding the paper like it was a bomb. You have money? You sold paintings? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let us live like this? Mark, I crossed my arms over my chest and looked at him with the deepest disdain. Look closely. I don't live off Douglas money. I don't need this damned estate. I stayed here, endured your sister-in-law's humiliation and your mother's contempt because I thought you needed family. I thought you needed time to grow up. I stepped forward and snatched the bank statement from his hand. But it turns out, I'm the only one in this house raising 3 children. And raising your cowardice as well. I didn't tell you because I knew that if you saw this money, you'd use it to buy more wine, more fake pride, and you'd never lift your lazy ass to find a job. Mark opened his mouth, trying to find words to justify himself, but nothing came out. Mark, I lowered my voice, exhaustion washing over me. When was the last time you used money you earned yourself to buy diapers for our child? 3 years ago? Or never? Do you know the kids stopped asking where's dad, a long time ago? To them, you're just a piece of furniture when it's there, it takes up space, when it's gone, no one notices. A useless decoration. Mark backed up, bumping into the sofa, the contract sheets scattering across the floor. The bare truth had stripped him of the last shred of his dignity. He realized he wasn't a fallen aristocrat, just a man freeloading off his wife. I pointed straight at the front door. This money is for me and my children. Not a penny is for your wine or your tattered pride. I walked to the door and flung it open. The cold wind rushed in, but it wasn't as cold as my eyes at that moment. Pack your things and go sleep at the main castle with your noble brother and sister-in-law. Go cry to Victoria that your wife won't sell her baby, and see if she gives you a glass of wine to comfort you. You're kicking me out? This is my house. Mark protested weakly. This is my and my children's home. And you belong to that cold stone castle. In this house, I already take care of 3 children. I have no need to take care of one more useless grown man. This 24. Mark stood there for a while, looking at me, then at the scattered papers. Finally, he lowered his head, grabbed his coat and the half-empty bottle of wine, and trudged out like a beaten dog. The door slammed shut. I leaned against it, sliding slowly down to the floor. The room was silent. For the first time in 7 years, the air in the house was truly fresh, no smell of alcohol, no smell of cowardice. I had thrown the parasite out of my home. But I knew this act also meant I had officially declared war against the entire Douglas family. They would not sit still watching their puppet being thrown out into the cold. 3 days after I kicked Mark out of the house, the brief peace ended. I knew the Douglas family wouldn't leave me alone, but I didn't expect them to act so quickly and so ruthlessly. They didn't use physical violence, they used a weapon far more terrifying, power disguised under the name of medicine. That morning, the sky over upstate New York was leaden gray. I was sitting and painting by the window when I saw a group of people walking over from the main castle. Leading them was Mrs. Douglas in an all-black outfit, followed by Alexander, Victoria with an undisguised triumphant expression, and finally Mark trailing behind like a dog with its tail between its legs. But what made the back of my neck go cold was the appearance of a stranger, a balding middle-aged man carrying a worn leather briefcase, his shifty eyes darting behind thick glasses. They didn't knock. Alexander used the spare key, the one I thought Mark had lost long ago, to fling open the front door. They flooded into my small living room like an occupying force, bringing with them cold and suffocating oppression. "Sit down, Ellen," Mrs. Douglas ordered, not invited. She sat on the only single chair, while the others stood in a circle surrounding me. I didn't sit. I leaned back against the easel, arms crossed, trying to keep my breathing steady even though my heart was pounding. "What are you all here to do?" "We're here to help you, Ellen," Victoria said, her voice sweet enough to make one sick. "Mark told us about your crisis that night. Screaming, throwing things, delusions about being wealthy. You're truly pitiful." I let out a short, mocking laugh. "Delusions? I have bank statements to prove it, Victoria." "Anyone can print fake statements," Alexander cut in, his voice disdainful. He motioned for the stranger to step forward. "Let me introduce you, this is Dr. Thorne, a leading psychiatrist our family trusts." Dr. Thorne placed his leather briefcase on my dining table, opened it, and pulled out a thick stack of documents. He didn't look at me, only focused on the papers, his voice flat and mechanical like a programmed machine. "Mrs. Douglas, based on the family's descriptions and reports from nearby neighbors, patient Ellen Vance exhibits typical symptoms of bipolar disorder accompanied by acute paranoia. Witnesses, specifically the gardener and the family's nanny, confirm that they often hear the patient screaming to herself, displaying agitation and uncontrolled emotional behavior." I froze. The neighbors he mentioned were Douglas employees. They had turned the argument when I kicked Mark out into evidence of madness. "You've never examined me for even 1 second, doctor," I growled. "How can you diagnose me?" "I have sufficient behavioral observation data," Thorne replied, pushing up his glasses. "And your aggressive denial right now is also a symptom." Mrs. Douglas placed her hand on that fabricated file, looking at me with the eyes of a judge issuing a death sentence. "Ellen, the situation is very serious. A mentally unstable mother cannot raise children, much less carry a pregnancy safely." She pushed another document toward me. It was a relinquishment of custody form and a consent to intrafamily adoption. "You should sign the consent to hand over the baby in your womb to Alexander and his wife. We have enough evidence showing you have severe psychological instability and psychosis. You are not capable of raising another child. A crazy mother has no right to keep her children. This is the only way for you to avoid being thrown into a mental institution and losing custody of all 3 older ones." The room was silent. Victoria smirked triumphantly, her eyes saying, "See? I told you'd regret it." Mark still hung his head, his cowardice now turning into guilty complicity. They had backed me into a corner. Either lose the baby, or be labeled insane and lose all my children. A perfect trap woven with money and power. I picked up the psychological evaluation. Personality disorder, danger to self and others. The words danced before my eyes. Anger surged in me, but right after that, it cooled into a sharp block of ice. I saw the fatal flaw in their perfect scheme. I began laughing. Not a mocking chuckle, but a loud, crisp, carefree laugh as if I had just heard the funniest story of the century. My laughter echoed through the small room, making Dr. Thorne drop his pen, and wiping the smile completely off Victoria's face. "What are you laughing at? Are you having an episode?" Alexander shouted. I threw the paper onto the table, the laughter stopping abruptly. I looked straight at my mother-in-law, who had gone pale from my insolence. "Mother," I called her by that intimate title in a deliberately mocking way, dragging out the final syllable. "You say I'm insane. That my genetic makeup is defective? That my mind is a chaotic mess of delusion and sickness? The exam results and the doctor's evaluation say it all." She lifted her chin, trying to maintain her dignity. "Then that's very strange." I walked around the table and moved toward Victoria, who shrank back a little under my presence. "If I'm insane, if my genes are garbage, if my blood is contaminated with psychosis, then why does this entire prestigious family crave the baby in my womb so much?" I planted my hands on the table, leaning close to Mrs. Douglas, staring deep into those old calculating eyes. "Why are you all desperate to turn the product of a madwoman into the sole heir of the Douglas bloodline? Has your noble lineage run so dry that you have to beg for the genes of a lunatic to keep it going?" Victoria's face shifted from white to fiery red. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Mrs. Douglas was speechless, her hand trembling violently on the wooden table. I had struck their fatal weak point, their pride in their bloodline. They couldn't insult the origin of the child while yearning for it at the same time. "You're slapping yourselves in the face, Mrs. Douglas," I continued, my voice hard as steel. "You have two choices right now. Listen carefully." I raised my index finger. 1. Admit I'm completely sane, and tear up this piece of trash. I raised my second finger. 2. Go ahead and declare I'm insane in court. Call the police. But I swear to God, the moment I'm taken away, I will go public to every newspaper in New York that the Douglas Corporation is trying to install a child with hereditary mental illness as the heir. What will happen to your stocks when investors learn the future leader is the child of a madwoman? You dare threaten us?" Alexander growled, but his voice was already trembling. He knew better than anyone how powerful public opinion was on stock prices. "I'm not threatening, Alexander. I'm negotiating," I replied coldly. "And Dr. Thorne, would you like your medical license revoked when I request an independent psychiatric board evaluation? I have money to hire the best lawyers, not Douglas money, Ellen Vance money." Dr. Thorne hurriedly packed his documents, sweat pouring down his face. "Mrs. Douglas, I think I need to review some data. There may have been a misunderstanding." Mrs. Douglas stared at me. For the first time, she saw the real danger coming from this useless daughter-in-law. She knew I had them by the throat. Reputation was the only thing they valued more than money. "Go home," she hissed through her teeth, standing up abruptly. "Go home. Now." Mark sneaked a glance at me, his eyes full of fear, then hurried to follow his mother and his brother and sister-in-law. When the door closed behind them, I finally allowed myself to tremble. I collapsed into a chair, cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. I had won this battle, but I knew it was only temporary. They had retreated out of shock, but they would return with dirtier, more calculated tricks. They had money, they had power, and most importantly they had no conscience. I looked out the window and saw their silhouettes disappearing toward the main castle. I needed a weapon. I could no longer defend myself with words alone. I needed something that could destroy them at the root, something that would make them never dare come near my children again. And I knew where to find it. In the shadows of that castle, there was someone who hated them as much as I did. It was time I needed an ally. My target was Martha, the old head housekeeper, the woman whose face was as worn and harsh as the stone walls of the estate. She had served the Douglas family for 30 years, witnessing every brick laid and every secret buried. In Victoria's eyes, Martha was just a walking piece of furniture, a cleaning machine without emotions. But I had watched her long enough to see the flame of hatred smoldering in her cloudy eyes whenever Alexander walked past. I found her in the late afternoon, when she was hunched over trimming the thorny rose bushes in the backyard, a task Victoria made her do because the gardener lacks delicacy. "Mrs. Martha," I called softly. She jolted, turned around, and her thin hands tightened on the pruning shears. "Miss Ellen," she said, her voice hoarse, her eyes darting toward the castle windows as if afraid of being watched. "You shouldn't be here. Mrs. Victoria has forbidden anyone to speak to you." "Mrs. Victoria," I repeated, stepping closer, ignoring the thorns scratching at my hem. "The woman who threw a napkin in your face last week because the soup was slightly cold? Or the woman who called your daughter a little slut 5 years ago?" "Wait." The pruning shears dropped from Martha's hands, hitting the ground with a sharp metallic clink. Her face went pale, then darkened with anger. "Don't mention Sarah. You don't know anything." "I know everything, Martha," I said, my voice steady but full of compassion. "I know why Sarah had to leave. I know who drove her to the edge in that damned office. Sarah wasn't a slut. Alexander Douglas was a predator who wanted to devour her." Martha began trembling violently. She covered her mouth, stifling a sob. It was a wound that had never healed in the heart of this poor mother. She hated them, but she needed money to survive, needed the fake security they gave her. "I can help you, and I can help Sarah," I whispered, pulling a brand new bank card from my pocket. "There's enough money in here for Sarah to open the bakery she always dreamed of in New York. And enough for you to retire tomorrow, leave this hell forever." Martha looked at the card, then at me, suspicion in her eyes. "Why? Where did you get this money? And what do you want?" "My money. Clean money, earned by my talent, not begged from the Douglas family." I held her rough, calloused hands. "I want justice, Martha. You've been silent for 30 years. You watched them crush your daughter's life. Now they want to take my child. Will you stand by and let history repeat itself, or will you help me burn their lies to the ground?" Silence stretched endlessly. I saw the struggle in her eyes between ingrained fear and the desire for revenge. Finally, she picked up the shears, gripping them tightly, her gaze becoming razor sharp. "Tax evasion evidence is always in the hidden safe behind the cabinet door. And other interesting evidence is always somewhere far away. Alexander is cunning. He never keeps incriminating evidence in the house, where Mrs. Victoria can rummage through things anytime." "I understand what you mean," I replied. Martha looked around, then leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Every Thursday. He always tells Mrs. Victoria he's going to a board meeting in New York and staying at the company apartment. But his personal driver says he never goes to the company on Thursday nights. He drives himself to a suburb in southern upstate New York, to a villa called Rosewood Cabin." She stuffed a piece of paper with a scribbled address into my hand. "Today is Thursday. He left 15 minutes ago. If you take the shortcut through the oak forest, you can catch him." 1 hour later, I parked my old car behind a thick cluster of trees about 50 meters from the gate of Rosewood Cabin. It was a cozy red brick house, completely separate from the cold, imposing Douglas Castle. The surroundings were silent, with only the wind whistling through the window cracks. My heart was pounding. I took out my phone and switched to the highest resolution video mode. The iron gate opened, and Alexander's sleek black Bentley slowly rolled into the yard. But what stunned me wasn't the car, it was the change in the man who stepped out. Alexander Douglas, the man who was always stern, cold, and disdainful at home, stepped out of the car with a radiant smile I had never seen once in 7 years. He loosened his tie and tossed his expensive suit jacket casually into the car. The front door swung open. A young, beautiful, voluptuous woman in a silk nightgown ran out and threw her arms around his neck. Alexander lifted her up, spun her around, and kissed her passionately right there in the yard, a romantic gesture he had never given Victoria. But the real shock came immediately after. "Daddy. Daddy." A chubby 3-year-old boy with golden hair exactly like Alexander's toddled out from inside the house. "Daddy's little Alexander Jr." Alexander set his lover down, knelt on the ground, and opened his arms wide to receive the boy. He hugged the child tightly, kissing his cheek, his face overflowing with holy fatherly love. "Were you good? Daddy was so busy this week, missed you too so much." Alexander's voice rang clear in the quiet night. I held my breath, my hands trembling but still gripping the phone. The camera captured every moment, every expression, every word. I zoomed in on the boy's face, a perfect replica of the Douglas bloodline, and on Alexander's shamelessly joyful expression. I filmed a few more clips, the three of them walking into the house together, Alexander carrying the boy on his shoulders through the lit doorway, the three of them eating dinner happily like a model family. Clear, sharp, undeniable. When I had everything I needed, over 10 minutes of high-quality footage with GPS location and timestamp, I turned off my phone and tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat, right over my pounding heart. This wasn't just evidence of infidelity. This was a death sentence for Victoria's honor and Alexander's career. Victoria, the woman who prided herself on purity and loyalty, what would happen when she found out her husband had built an entire second home right under her nose? And what would the shareholders think when they learned their chairman was a deceitful man violating major ethical terms? I started the car, keeping the headlights off until I got off the dirt road. On the drive back, I no longer felt fear. The trembling had vanished, replaced by the cold calm of someone holding the power to destroy. Tonight, Alexander was sleeping peacefully in the arms of his mistress and his illegitimate child. He had no idea that just outside that rose-covered fence, the scythe of death had passed by and taken with it the weapon that would burn his entire empire to the ground. When I got home, I copied the video onto 3 different USB drives. One I hid under the floor. One I would put in a bank safe tomorrow morning. And the last one would be the brightest star at the upcoming birthday party. I looked at the computer screen, where the image of Alexander's happy little family was frozen, and I smiled. Poor Victoria, you always longed for a child. Your husband already took care of that for you. Too bad. You don't have a ticket to attend this happiness. After having everything in my hands, I could bring these pieces of evidence to the police station first thing tomorrow morning. Alexander would be arrested, Victoria would be humiliated, and the Douglas family would be shaken. But that would be too gentle. A quick death is never enough to pay for 7 years of being belittled and humiliated. I want them to taste the feeling of hope rising to its peak, then being kicked into the abyss. I want their destruction to be a masterpiece of art, displayed before the entire upper class they always longed to belong to. And the perfect stage for that performance is coming very soon. Victoria's 40th birthday party. The biggest event of the year in upstate New York. The press would come, business partners from New York would gather, and Victoria, the woman obsessed with perfection, would stand at the center of the spotlight, enjoying the most glorious moment of her life. That would be when I give her the gift she deserves. For an entire week afterward, I locked myself in the studio. I pulled the curtains shut, refused to go outside, refused to answer any phone calls. To those in the main castle, my silence was a sign of collapse. They believed that Dr. Thorne's mental trap and the financial pressure had broken my will. They believed the wild animal had been tamed and was lying there licking its wounds, waiting to die. They were wrong. I wasn't running. I was sharpening my knife. On the 5th afternoon, my front door opened slightly. It was Mark. He slipped back in, looking furtive like a thief revisiting the scene of the crime. He thought I was asleep or crying somewhere, so he jumped when he saw me sitting motionless in the armchair in the dark, holding a glass of water. "Oh my God, Ellen, you scared me to death," Mark exclaimed, clutching his chest. I looked at him, the husband in name only, now looking gaunt and pathetic in his designer clothes that were beginning to wrinkle. "What are you doing back here?" I asked, my voice hoarse, deliberately creating the impression of exhaustion and resignation. Mark swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the messy room filled with canvases. I came back to get my tuxedo. Tomorrow night is Victoria's big party. I need to look presentable. Ah, right. The party, I whispered, my eyes distant. The Queen's big day. Mark tiptoed into the bedroom, hurriedly gathering a few pieces of clothing. When he came out and saw I wasn't reacting aggressively, he seemed to regain a bit of courage. His arrogant nature resurfaced inside that cowardly man. "You look terrible, Ellen," he said, standing a safe distance away. "Mother was right. You're destroying yourself. If you had just listened from the beginning, you would be receiving proper medical care by now, and we wouldn't be in this state." I lowered my head, my shoulders trembling slightly. Mark thought I was crying, but I was actually suppressing a contemptuous smile. I needed him to believe that I had collapsed. I needed him to carry this false good news back to his masters so they would lower their guard at the last moment. "Mark," I looked up, my eyes red thanks to a little pastel dust I had rubbed in. "I'm so tired." Mark blinked, surprised by the rare weakness in me. What did you say?" "I'm tired of fighting," I sighed, my voice trembling. "Dr. Thorne, he might be right. Maybe something is really wrong with my mind. Lately I've been hearing strange sounds, and I feel exhausted whenever I think about the future of this baby." In another text, Mark's face lit up. He stepped closer, greed gleaming openly in his eyes. "Ellen, you finally realized. Thank God. I told you, Alexander and Victoria only want the best for us." I nodded weakly, my hand holding my belly. "But I'm scared, Mark. I'm scared of the crowd, I'm scared of their looks. I need time to think carefully before signing that paper." Mark quickly sat down in the chair across from me, his voice full of urgency. "You don't need to think much, honey. Just sign and everything will be over. We'll have money, you'll get to rest, we can go on vacation." "No," I cried out, pretending to panic. "Don't pressure me right now. I'll go crazy." Mark raised both hands in surrender, trying to calm me. All right. Calm down, Ellen. I'm not forcing you." I took a few deep breaths, regaining my fake composure. "Mark, tell Victoria and Alexander that I'm seriously considering their offer. I think maybe it's the best solution for the baby." "Really?" Mark asked, unable to hide his joy. "You promise?" "I promise I'll make the final decision after the birthday party," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. "But I have one condition. From now until then, no one bothers me. No one comes here to threaten or pressure me anymore. I need peace. If they stress me any further, I don't know what foolish thing I might do." Mark nodded repeatedly like a pecking chicken. In his head he was surely already imagining returning to his luxurious life, being praised by his brother for taming his stubborn wife. "I promise. I'll tell Victoria right away. She'll definitely agree. As long as you behave, everything will be fine, Ellen." "Then friends." He stood up, grabbed his clothes bag, his face bright with joy as if he had just won the lottery. Before stepping out the door, he turned back to me, showing a bit of fake affection for the first time in weeks. "Get some rest, okay? And? Do you want to come to the party? Just to take your mind off things." I gave him a weak smile. "I don't know. I have nothing to wear, and I don't want to ruin everyone's good time." "All right then, it's up to you. But remember your promise," Mark said before quickly leaving me alone in the dark. When his footsteps finally faded, I stood up, the weak smile on my lips disappearing, replaced by razor-sharp coldness. I walked to the easel and yanked the cover off. The painting I had worked on all week was not a landscape, nor was it abstract. It was a portrait. A tragic portrait of collapse. "Don't worry, Mark," I whispered into the empty air. "I'll go to the party. And I'll wear the most fitting thing for an execution." The plan was in motion. They would think I had surrendered. They would think I was a docile sheep waiting to be sheared. They would raise their glasses to an early victory at that lavish party, not knowing I had planted the detonator right beneath their throne. I opened the wardrobe, pulling out the box hidden deep at the bottom of the chest. Inside was the blood-red evening gown, the color of life, the color of power, and the color of revenge. I had bought it with the money from selling my first painting in New York, saving it for a special occasion. And no occasion would be more special than tomorrow. Tomorrow, the world of the Douglas family would burn, and I would be the one striking the match. 7 o'clock in the evening. Snow began falling thicker, covering the Douglas estate with a stark white shroud. But inside the main castle, the atmosphere was burning hot with thousands of candles and the breaths of the upper class of upstate New York. Bentleys and Rolls-Royces lined up at the arched entrance, dropping off gentlemen in glossy black tuxedos and ladies draped in fur, their necks heavy with diamonds. They came to toast Victoria, the uncrowned queen of the Douglas Empire. They came to admire the fabricated perfection she had painstakingly crafted for 40 years. I stood before the large mirror in my shabby bedroom, applying a layer of deep red lipstick on my lips. The mirror no longer reflected Ellen, the frazzled mother in an old sweater who always bowed her head. The woman in the mirror wore a blood-red evening gown, its silk fabric hugging her body, her slightly rounded belly held proudly. The color of life, the color of power, and tonight, the color of punishment. I stepped out of the house, not through the back door like always. I walked straight through the main gate, head held high, entering the tiger's den. When the elderly butler at the front door saw me, he nearly dropped the guest list. He reached out as if to stop me, but my icy gaze made him recoil. I didn't need an invitation. I was the keeper of the key to the Pandora's box about to be opened. The banquet hall doors swung open. The soft music from the symphony orchestra fell silent for a moment. The murmuring conversations stopped. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. Among a sea of people dressed in dull black and white, my red dress was like a vivid and dangerous slash. I saw Mark holding a wine glass beside a group of businessmen, his face drained of color, the glass trembling violently in his hand. I saw Mrs. Douglas sitting on a velvet upholstered armchair like a dowager queen, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. And Victoria. She stood at the center of the room, radiant in her sparkling sequin gown. When she saw me, the smile on her lips froze for a second, then quickly shifted into triumph. She thought I came to surrender. She believed this red dress was my final desperate attempt to please the family before signing the paper to sell my child. Victoria separated herself from the crowd, gliding toward me with the fake magnanimity of someone superior. "Ellen," she called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I didn't think you'd have the courage to show up. But I'm glad. You finally know where your true support lies." I smiled, a sweet and deadly smile. "How could I be absent on the most important day of your life, Victoria? You've taught me so much about the value of family." Victoria leaned in close, her whisper full of claws and venom. "What on earth are you wearing?" Trying to be the center of attention. "But fine, since you've come to your senses. Did you bring the answer I asked for? Mark said you've thought it through." "I've thought very carefully," I replied, my eyes gleaming. "And I didn't just bring the answer. I brought a special gift. A gift worthy of your perfection." Victoria's eyes lit up with greed. "Good. After you sign, I'll transfer the money immediately. Be sensible and your life will be easier." She turned to the crowd and clapped her hands to draw attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for my sister-in-law, Ellen. Today is a wonderful day, as our Douglas family not only celebrates my birthday, but is also about to welcome a new member officially joining us according to proper standards. Scattered, polite, curious applause followed. Alexander stood next to his wife, smirking, raising his glass toward me as if to toast prey walking into a trap. I stepped onto the stage, gently took the microphone from the confused host. I stood there, under the brilliant crystal chandelier, looking down at the dignified faces below. I caught sight of Martha standing in a dark corner near the sound booth. She gave me a subtle nod. "Thank you, Victoria," my voice rang out clearly through the speakers, sharp and powerful. "You're right. Today is a day for truth. To celebrate my sister-in-law's 40th birthday, a woman obsessed with perfection and pure bloodlines, I have prepared a gift. Not a painting, because my paintings are far too cheap for your taste. This gift is a reflection of yourself." Victoria frowned, sensing something wrong in my tone. She tried to step forward to stop me, but it was too late. "Please direct your attention to the screen," I said, pointing at the large projector behind me, where moments ago images of the Douglas Corporation's glory were being shown. Martha pressed the button. The screen went black, then lit up. It wasn't an artistic video. It was footage from a kitchen security camera, slightly grainy in image but with perfectly clear audio. On the screen, Victoria stood with her hands on her hips, her face twisted in anger, pointing at the chef, but her words were aimed at someone else. "Why hasn't that old woman died yet? She's senile and clutching that chairman's seat like a dog guarding a bone. I'm sick of playing the dutiful daughter-in-law. The moment she dies, I'm kicking that useless brother-in-law Mark and his poor painter wife out on the street. This estate is mine. Mine." The entire hall gasped in horror. Ladies covered their mouths, gentlemen stood stunned. Mrs. Douglas, sitting in the front row, turned white as a sheet. She trembled as she stood up, clutching the chair, staring at her eldest daughter-in-law, the one she always proudly bragged was classy and dutiful. Victoria screamed and rushed toward the tech table. "Turn it off. Turn it off. Who did this? This is fake. You bitch, Ellen, how dare." "That's not all, Victoria," I said loudly, drowning out her screams. "That was just the appetizer. The main course is for your beloved husband, the Honorable Alexander." I signaled to a server one I had paid $500 beforehand to open the side door. A group of business reporters and paparazzi, who had received my confidential tip, swarmed in like a flock of vultures sensing fresh carcass. I tossed the thick file I had copied into the air. Papers floated down like snow, mixed with sharp, colored photos. "Members of the press," I shouted. "Here are the last 10 years of Alexander Douglas's tax evasion documents, taken from his own secret safe. And even more interesting." I bent down, picking up a photo that landed at Alexander's feet, his face now chalk gray. I held the picture high. Here is Alexander Douglas with his mistress and their 3-year-old son. A child he hid in the shadows while pressuring my husband and me to sell our own baby so he could have a legitimate heir with clean lineage. I turned to Victoria, who stood frozen in the middle of the stage, her thick makeup unable to hide the total collapse spreading across her face. "Victoria," I said, my voice gentle but as cruel as a blade. "You always longed for a child to manage the estate, didn't you? Congratulations. Your husband already did that for you 3 years ago. It's just a pity the mother of the child isn't you." No, this can't be," Victoria stammered, eyes glued to the photo in my hand, then whipping toward her husband. "Alexander? Say something. Say she's lying." Alexander couldn't say a word. He stumbled backward, knocking into the banquet table and toppling the champagne tower. The crashing glass sounded like a funeral bell tolling for their dynasty. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Bursts of white light cracked through the chaos like lightning, capturing the most humiliating moment in the history of this once prestigious family. I stood there, in the eye of the storm, my red dress blazing like a flame swallowing all the surrounding lies. I was no longer the rabbit in the cage. Tonight, I was the hunter, and the pack of wolves had fallen into the trap. The air in the grand hall seemed to constrict. The flashes from the reporters' cameras were the only sound cutting through the chaos, like continuous bolts of lightning striking the collapsed ruins of what used to be the Douglas family's honor. Victoria stood there in the middle of the stage, her arms hanging limp. Her eyes darted wildly from the photo of Alexander embracing his mistress in my hand, to her husband's pale, shrinking face, and then to the whispering crowd. The clean, perfect, noble world she had spent 40 years building had collapsed in an instant. And then her eyes found me. No more arrogance. No more cold contempt of a frost queen. In her eyes now burned the flames of madness. She no longer looked at me as a human being, but as a monster who had stolen her crown. "You," Victoria hissed, the sound like metal being crushed. "You bitch. What have you done? What have you done? You bitch." She lunged at me. No trace of noble elegance remained. She charged like a wounded animal cornered, her hand with those meticulously manicured claws raised high, aiming straight at my face. "I'll kill you. I'll tear you apart." The crowd gasped in horror. Mrs. Douglas let out a shrill scream. Mark stood frozen, not daring to move. But I had been waiting for this moment. I didn't back away. I didn't close my eyes. Just as Victoria's hand swung down, I lifted mine and grabbed her wrist tightly in midair. "Let go of me," Victoria screamed, thrashing wildly. I tightened my grip, my nails digging into her flesh. I could feel the frantic pulse beneath that smooth skin, the beat of fear and helplessness. I yanked her toward me, pressing my face close to hers so she could clearly see the coldness in the eyes of the person she once viewed as prey. "Stop it, Victoria," I said, my voice low and steely, loud enough to drown out the surrounding noise. "Look at what you've turned into. A queen? Or a pathetic failure clawing at the last scraps of pride?" Victoria panted heavily, the foundation on her face cracking along the wrinkles of rage, tears smudging her mascara into ugly black streaks running down her cheeks. "You ruined my life. You low-born thing. You're jealous of me," she sobbed, trying to yank her hand free but failing miserably. "I gave you a chance. I was going to grant you a royal life. Why did you bite back?" "Grant me?" I scoffed, shoving her hand away so forcefully that Victoria staggered back several steps. "You still don't understand? You never had the right to grant me anything." I took a step forward, forcing her slowly toward the edge of the stage. "You think money can buy everything? You think $750,000 is a bargain price for a child? You called my baby a transaction. You called motherhood ownership. You treated my womb like a production factory for this rotten Douglas bloodline." I paused, glancing briefly at Alexander, who was lowering his head to avoid the camera flashes, then turned back to stare at Victoria. "That is why nature refused to give you that privilege, Victoria. Nature is wise. It knows who deserves to be a mother, and who deserves only loneliness." That sentence was like an invisible slap across Victoria's face. Her mouth fell open, her eyes widening in shock. I had struck her deepest wound, the pain she always hid behind arrogance and cruelty. "You. How dare you?" she stammered, her voice trembling weakly. "Oh, I dare," I continued, my voice echoing like a verdict. "You called my children rabbits, low quality. But look at them, those rabbits were born from love, raised with real sacrifice. And you, what do you have? A cold mansion. A cheating husband with a secret child behind your back? A mother-in-law who only sees you as a tool to manage assets?" Victoria covered her face, a broken sob escaping. The naked truth had ripped away all her armor. She stood there, exposed and pitiful before hundreds of scrutinizing eyes. I bent down and picked up the $750,000 check she had given me in the rose garden, the one I kept as proof of this humiliation. I crumpled it and shoved it into her limp hand. "Take it," I said coldly. Keep your money to hire someone to care for you in old age. Because this baby and all my children will never call a woman who put a price on them, mother." Victoria stared at the crumpled paper in her hand, then looked at me with desperate pleading eyes, as if wishing this were just a nightmare and she'd wake up still in control. "Ellen, please. Don't do this. Everyone is watching." "Let them watch," I replied, without an ounce of pity. "Let them see the real face behind these lavish parties." I turned to the crowd below, who were holding their breath as they watched the drama reach its climax. I saw Mark staring at me with absolute terror. I saw Mrs. Martha smiling through her tears, the smile of a woman freed after 30 years of oppression. Then I turned back to Victoria one last time. I pushed her hand away as she tried to grab the hem of my red dress. "And you, Victoria," I leaned close to her ear, whispering the final blow, "you will forever be just a wealthy woman desperately trying to rent her sister-in-law's womb because her own factory shut down permanently. You lost to me your entire life. Not because I'm richer, or prettier, but because I have something you can never buy. I am a mother. And you are just a failed trafficker." Victoria let out a cry of agony and collapsed onto the stage floor. She buried her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, her cries echoing through the grand hall that had now become desolate. No one stepped up to help her. Not even Alexander, who turned his face away. Mrs. Douglas had already fainted in her armchair. The Douglas Empire, the symbol of power and perfection in upstate New York, had collapsed at my feet. Me, the rabbit they once despised. I adjusted the hem of my red gown, lifted my chin, and stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted to either side automatically, clearing a path for me as if for a true queen. Camera flashes still flickered non-stop, but I didn't care. I walked out the main doors, where the cold wind rushed in, carrying the freedom and peace I had craved for 7 long years. Tonight, the rabbit bit back. And that bite was fatal. Victoria's extravagant birthday party had officially turned into a disaster scene. Her sobbing on stage was only the overture to the symphony of destruction I had composed. The noble guests, the business partners who once toasted the Douglas family, were now stepping back, forming an isolating ring around them, their eyes wavering between disgust and the morbid curiosity of vultures. But I wasn't finished. A good play needs a blazing climax. Just as Alexander was trying to lift his pitiful wife up while shouting at security to kick out the reporters, the grand doors of the hall swung open again. This time, it wasn't guests or the press. Red and blue lights from outside cast through the tall glass panels, painting the room in the colors of the law. A group of police officers in uniform, led by 2 detectives in plain clothes with stern expressions, stepped inside. The badges on their chests gleamed under the chandelier lights. "Who allowed you in here?" Alexander shouted, his face flushed red, trying to salvage the last bit of authority of a master of the house. "This is the Douglas estate. I'll sue you for trespassing." The lead detective didn't flinch. He walked straight up to Alexander and pulled out a document stamped in bright red. "Alexander Douglas?" he asked, his voice cold. "That's me. And you'll lose your job tomorrow morning for this insolence." "I am Chief Inspector Miller from the Economic Crimes Division," the man said, his voice booming over the murmurs. "We have an emergency arrest warrant for you on charges of large-scale tax evasion, commercial fraud, and money laundering through offshore accounts." Alexander went rigid. He stumbled back, crashing into the banquet table. "What? Ridiculous. Where did you get the evidence?" "My accountant handled everything." I took a step forward, pointing at the scattered papers still covering the floor, copies from the black ledger I had exposed earlier. "The evidence is right under your feet, Alexander," I said calmly. "And the original has been on the police commissioner's desk since this morning. Along with Mrs. Martha's testimony and the bank transactions you thought you deleted." Alexander snapped his head toward me, his eyes wild with fury as if he wanted to devour me alive. You venomous snake." He lunged toward me. But immediately, 2 officers rushed in. The sound of metal striking metal echoed sharply. Clack. The cold handcuffs locked around the wrists of the most powerful man in upstate New York. The sight made the whole hall fall silent. Alexander Douglas, the man who never bowed to anyone, the man who held the region's economy in his hands, was now subdued like an ordinary criminal. On the other side of the stage, Mrs. Douglas saw her eldest son being escorted away. "No, Alexander, my son," she whispered, trying to crawl back up, but her legs no longer obeyed her. She looked around, searching for help. But Victoria was still sitting on the floor, staring blankly into space. Mrs. Douglas looked up at me. This time, there was no contempt, no gaze that saw me as a breeding tool. In those old eyes remained only terror and the acceptance of defeat. She realized that her own greed and cruelty had created the monster named Ellen standing before her today. "Ellen." She called my name, her voice trembling in plea. "Please. We are family." I looked down at her and answered coldly, "Family? Mrs. Douglas, have you forgotten? Your family only includes people with utility value. And right now, your value is a negative number." The police began dispersing the crowd. The party had ended in the most catastrophic way. I turned to leave, ready to walk away from the ruins behind me. But a hand grabbed my arm. It was Mark. He stood there, amidst the chaos, his face pale, tears and sweat mixing together. He looked at me as if I were the last lifebuoy floating above the sinking Douglas ship. "Ellen!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Where are you going? You can't leave now. Look at what you've done." I brushed his hand away, dusting my sleeve as if I had touched something filthy. "I did what you should have done a long time ago, Mark. I took out the trash." Mark trembled, pointing at his brother being dragged away by police. "That's my brother. That's my source of living. You put him in jail. How am I supposed to live? Who will pay for my wine? Who will pay my debts? You're insane. You've killed me." I looked at the man in front of me, my husband of 7 years, the father of my 3 children. And I felt nothing. No anger, no heartbreak. Only emptiness and contempt. "Mark," I said, exhausted. "At this moment, when your brother is arrested, your sister-in-law has gone mad, your mother has collapsed. The only thing you're worried about is who will pay for your wine." I leaned closer, staring into those cowardly eyes widening in terror. "Look at yourself. A 35-year-old man in borrowed clothes, crying. You are not my husband. You have never been my husband. Ellen, please." Mark collapsed to his knees, clinging to my legs, sobbing like a child abandoned by his mother. I looked down at the top of his head, remembering all the days he demanded the kids stay quiet so they wouldn't bother Alexander, remembering the moment he tried to sell the baby in my womb. "Don't worry, Mark," I said, my voice icy as I pried his hands off my leg. "You still won't have to carry any responsibility, you bearded child. Because I can easily raise my 4 children alone. And you? You can either learn to grow up, or starve to death along with your torn, worthless noble pride." The sloke. I walked out of the grand hall, leaving behind the police sirens, Victoria's hysterical sobbing, and Mark's desperate screams. Outside, the snow had stopped. The night sky was strangely clear. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the cold but liberating air of freedom. The Douglas Empire had collapsed. The monsters had been locked away in the cage of the law, and in the cage of poverty they feared most. I placed a hand on my belly, feeling the little life stirring inside. "Let's go home, my love," I whispered. Back to our home. The war was over. And I was the only one still standing on the battlefield. 6 months after that fateful night, the trial of Alexander Douglas ended with a shocking verdict: 12 years in prison for tax evasion, fraud, and money laundering. On the day of sentencing, I didn't go to the courthouse. I sat in my sunlit penthouse in Tribeca, New York, the apartment I bought with my own talent. I sipped tea while watching the news on TV. The image of Alexander handcuffed, head hung low, being escorted into the prison van looked truly pathetic. No more arrogance, no more custom-tailored suits, just a defeated, frightened middle-aged man. After Alexander's arrest, the banks simultaneously froze his assets to recover debts. The upstate New York estate, the family's century-old pride, was seized and put up for auction. I heard Victoria immediately filed for divorce in hopes of salvaging something, but she was too naive. Alexander had mortgaged everything, including her jewelry, into his phantom investments. Victoria left the courthouse empty-handed, her reputation ruined, becoming a laughingstock to the very aristocratic circle she once worshipped. "Mom, look at what I drew." Lily's voice, my eldest daughter, pulled me back to reality. She was sitting on the floor drawing, next to her two little brothers and the cradle of the youngest baby, the child Victoria once priced at $750,000. "Beautiful, sweetheart," I smiled, patting her head. My career had taken off brilliantly. The collection of paintings called Rabbits in a Gilded Cage, depicting the suffocating and artificial life at the Douglas estate, made a huge splash in New York and New York. The irony was so sweet. The very pain they caused me became the inspiration that helped me earn a fortune larger than anything they had ever possessed. The doorbell rang. It was my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, coming with the final court order regarding custody. But with him came an uninvited guest. Mark stood outside the door, gaunt, with scruffy beard, wearing a cheap worn-out coat. He looked 10 years older than the last time we met. "I told you not to come here," I said coldly, blocking the doorway. "Ellen, please," Mark begged, his voice hoarse. "I just want to see the baby." "I heard you already gave birth. Is it a boy or a girl?" "A healthy baby boy," I replied without emotion. "And he carries the Vance surname. His birth certificate doesn't have a single Douglas on it." Mark trembled, tears welling up. "You can't do that. I'm his father. I know I was wrong. I've been punished enough, Ellen. I'm working as a waiter in a bar. I'm trying to stand on my own. Give me a chance." I looked at the man who used to be my husband. The cowardice was still there, but now mixed with the desperation of someone cornered. "A chance?" I scoffed. "Mark, you had 7 years of chances. Where were you when Victoria insulted our children from morning to night? Where were you when your mother called me a breeding machine? Where were you when I needed a husband and not an overgrown child?" I was scared. Mark lowered his head. "I always lived in fear." "Then keep being afraid," I said firmly. "Because I will never let your cowardice spread to my children." Right at that moment, an old black car pulled up in front of the building. The window rolled down, revealing the old, hollowed face of Mrs. Douglas. I want to see my grandchildren. I regret everything. Our family lost everything, Ellen. I have to live in a rented place now. I just want to see the children." I turned to Mark and spoke loudly so she could hear. "Tell your mother this baby is not an heir to save the Douglas bloodline. He is my son. Back then, all of you priced him at $750,000. You treated him like a transaction. Now, he is priceless. And priceless things are not for those who only know how to assign them a price. Ellen. The children need their roots." Mark shouted desperately. "Their roots are love and dignity," I replied sharply. "Not lies and cowardice. Sign the divorce papers, Mark. If you sign peacefully, I'll support you with a small amount so you won't starve while finding work. But if you want to go to court and fight, I will use the very money I earned from the story of your family to bury you under legal fees." I turned back into the house, closing the door. Peaceful silence filled the space. I walked to the window, looking down at the bustling New York streets. I saw my reflection in the glass, a 34-year-old woman, a renowned painter, a single mother of 4 good children. No one looks down on me anymore. No one has any intention of separating me from my children anymore. No one constantly gets annoyed and forces my children to stay quiet anymore. And no one insults my children anymore. I walked toward the easel, where the newest painting was being completed. It was a painting of a radiant rose garden, but with no cages, no fences. In the middle of the rose garden was a lioness resting peacefully with her cubs. Lily ran up and hugged my leg. "Mom, what are you thinking about?" I lifted her up, kissed her cheek, and breathed in the scent of freedom and happiness. "I'm thinking," I whispered, "that I've finally become the queen of my own life. I had won. Not by guns or bullets, but by the resilience of a mother. And from the ashes of contempt, I had built a true castle, a castle of love, where there is no place for those who buy and sell kinship." Ellen's story is a powerful testament that maternal love is an unbreakable fortress. No force or money can tear it apart. The Douglas family, with the arrogance of the wealthy, believed money could buy kinship and price a life like merchandise, but they were wrong. Wealth without morality is just a shiny shell covering rot inside. Ellen taught us that when cornered, a mother becomes the strongest warrior to protect her child, proving that dignity and love are what is truly priceless, not those cold checks. A question for you. Imagine if Ellen's youngest child really belonged to Alexander and Victoria. Would he truly be loved and safe, or would he grow up as a lonely asset in that cold gilded cage? Now, if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and tell me which part surprised you the most. Every subscription and comment from you is a huge motivation for us to continue sharing more meaningful things in life. Thank you so much.